Greetings folks and welcome to the Electromaker Show. This is your roundup of all things maker and embedded and lovely. And on this week's show we'll be talking about the newly released Raspberry Pi Compute Module 5. As we all expected, it was coming and it has now been released with various different configuration options. We also look at a crowdfunding project called WebScreen, which is an innovative take on the webcam that slots on the top of your monitor, because this, well, it's not a webcam, it's a web screen. It has a bright AMOLED monitor that you can change and hack to your heart's content, or get a variety of apps that will do nice notification things for you. We'll also be looking at our product of the week, the Pimoroni nVMe base for Raspberry Pi 5 once again, which is a baseboard that allows you to attach nVMe drives to your Raspberry Pi 5 without covering the pins on top. With that and other things to get through in this week's show, let's get going. Just a couple of weeks ago, the confirmed but with no release date Raspberry Pi Compute Module 5 turned up at the Electromaker trade fair we were covering, just in very Raspberry Pi style, on a wall with no further information other than here is a Compute Module 5 with a development baseboard. And just 2 weeks later, the Compute Module 5 is now available to purchase. So the Raspberry Pi Compute Module 5 follows on in the footprint of all of the other Raspberry Pi Compute modules. But when I say footprint, I don't mean the literal footprint, because the first one was a SO-DIMM module, and since then they've changed up the way they connect in multiple ways. But essentially it is a stripped bare-bones Raspberry Pi that allows you to have various different hardware footprints underneath it. What you're getting on the actual Compute module itself is the same processor as a Raspberry Pi 5 and various forms of configuration, from 2GB up to 16GB of RAM, and eMMC up to 64 gigabytes, I think, and you can choose to have Wi-Fi connectivity or not if you don't require it. And much like other Compute modules, there is an official baseboard for it as well. This is the Compute Module I/O board, and as you can see, it breaks out pretty much everything that you would want from the Compute Module 5, which would be very good for when you are developing, say, your custom piece of hardware. But Raspberry Pi noticed over the years that people used a lot of the official development baseboards in shipped products, and so they have also put together this case for it as well, that includes things like heat dissipation, and I imagine you can see these boxes turning up in various forms of industrial automation over the next few years, as Raspberry Pis were equally taken on by people in the industry than hobbyists. In fact, I think it says somewhere in this article that something like 70% of all Raspberry Pi sales are actually commercial industrial use. But yes, it is now available starting at $45, and taking a quick look at it locally, I noticed that it's $58 for the base level one, so that's with connectivity with 2 gigs of RAM and the light hard drive, eMMC. I don't know exactly what that means. But if you're looking for the top spec one, again, locally, it might be different for you. You're looking at $144. No, 144 euros. What I found far more interesting, however, is that you can get a mid-spec Compute Module 5, so I think with 4 gigabytes of RAM and a 32 gigabyte eMMC drive, with the full kit that we were just talking about. So with the baseboard and with this case as well, and everything you will need to start developing with it. And I think for a lot of people who are watching this show, it might be something that you're not needing now. I can certainly see myself at some point in the future really seeing the benefit of having a Compute module to develop on when it comes to audio things. I've alluded so many times to the fact that I have a never-ending sort of synthesizer sampler that I've been dreaming up and prototyping in different ways for years. And sometimes I think, oh, it's going to be MCU based. Sometimes I think, no, it's going to be far easier if it does actually have an operating system. And if I'm doing that, I'm going to use a Raspberry Pi. It's by far the easiest way to get something like that up and running. But I could see myself at some point in the future getting something like this, just so that I could actually have a full hardware setup to prototype on, and then actually find a way of fitting it into a nice hardware box. Because at the end of the day, I want to sort of get away from screens as much as possible, but have the power to be able to get into one. If anyone's ever played the Waldorf Iridium synthesizer, it's something far too expensive for me to ever own, but I have fiddled with it, you'll sort of know what I'm getting at in terms of knobs, dials, but also a nice big screen and an operating system running underneath it. Anyway, I got somewhat off topic. The blog post from Evan Upton will of course be in the description of this video, and you can find the links out to the sale page as well. It's the first link here. That will take you to your local suppliers of them. A couple of notes, other than the different configurations as I've mentioned and the baseboard, this is pin for pin compatible with the Compute Module 4. There will of course be a few differences in exactly the way that you actually work with it and how you program with it, but mostly this is a compatible thing, and so if you are already working with the Compute Module 4, you shouldn't find it too difficult to work the Compute Module 5 into your baseboard design. But yes, in short, we knew the Compute Module 5 was coming, and it is now here and available to buy, starting at $45. It is time to talk about our product of the week, which is the Pimoroni nVMe base for Raspberry Pi 5. But before we do, we have to announce the winner of our previous product of the week giveaway, which was for the Seeedstudio round display. And the winner is D. Frisella, or D. Frisell, depending on how you pronounce it, who says, I think the Seed would be great as a wearable magnetic button, sort of like a Star Trek Next Generation communicator, but it's a display, so with a magnetic backer so it could be worn on a shirt or jacket, even a bag, plus attached to any metal surface. Meaning I could use it as a Home Assistant display / control, active name badge, clock, etc. Basically a small interface for a mobile smart assistant, and here's where it gets really interesting, especially if coupled with the remote self-hosted AILLM. And yes, that's a lot of wonderful ideas that all are very relevant to this display, and so congratulations D. Frisell or D. Frisella, we will be getting in touch with you as to how you can get this. This being the Seeedstudio round display, as previously mentioned. If you missed the previous product of the week, it is on the Electromaker blog. I'll leave a link to it underneath here, and you can find out a lot about this wonderful little display that is a lot more than just a display. It is a touchscreen, it has a real-time clock battery and a couple of other features, and best of all, it only costs $18, which is a pretty low price tag for something so highly feature rich, and as you just heard from the prize winner, there's a lot you could potentially do with it. Anyhow, let's move on to this week's product of the week, which is the nVMe base for Raspberry Pi 5 from Pimoroni. Now, in a sense, there's not all that much to say about this product. It does something simple but very, very well. It is a base for your Raspberry Pi, so the Pi goes on top of it, and the base allows you to attach NVMe SSD drives to the Raspberry Pi via PCIe through the high-speed connector on the Pi 5. Raspberry Pi have their own specifications when it comes to making things for the Pi, called the PIP, and Pimoroni have basically taken that and made the most compact base you possibly can while fitting within those specifications, and adding an NVMe SSD to your Pi gives you a massive jump in the data rate you can get between them, and of course takes away from needing to rely on micro SD cards for your operating system, which can be pretty painful when they break. Now, as always, I will leave it to Robin, our in-house gadget guru, to give you the full rundown of what the NVMe base is and what you could use it for. But just in brief, the stats that you will probably be interested in finding out is that it allows read speeds of up to 800 megabytes per second and write speeds of up to 450 megabytes per second, and it costs just $14.50 if you would like to buy one. I highly recommend coming and checking out the blog article and the video that Robin has made about it if you would like to find out more. But of course, if you would like to win one, then just head over to the video itself. You can get there by clicking on the video title in the blog article or going to our YouTube channel. I'll try and remember to stick a link here as well. Underneath the video, the very first top comment tells you how to enter. You need to leave the hashtag Pi5, and you need to tell us what you would do with the NVMe base for SSDs, base for air, sorry, I thought I'd said that wrong. Basically, if you tell us that and you leave the comment on this video, we will take all of the entries with the correct hashtag and an ID and choose a winner at random. This competition runs until the 17th of December 2024, at which point we will be closing entries and choosing someone to win it. So if you are interested in really upgrading your Raspberry Pi 5 and perhaps doing it for free by means of the giveaway, enter here and good luck. Recently, we talked about a webinar that Mauser put on with Analog Devices about optimizing robotics with radar and sensor fusion technologies. One of the things that a couple of people mentioned to me is that it was a really interesting idea, but the timing of the webinar didn't necessarily work for them. And as if by magic, Mauser have now made their webinars available on demand. So if you head to the link in the description, you can find webinars going all the way back to 2021, and you can get all of the content from them. And these are really quite interesting because Mauser tends to be able to talk to the very people who are making the technology that they're talking about in these webinars and get perspectives on them that are really quite unique, because these are frequently coming from people who were part of the manufacture of these components and parts and ideas in the first place. So you're really going to be able to get some quite interesting insights from it. I have barely started scratching the surface. I started watching some of the robotics with radar and sensor fusion technologies webinar because I had signed up for it, and I was one of the people who unfortunately couldn't be there in real time because of my life needs, my responsibilities. So I've just started watching through this one, but we have a big history of them to look through as well. So if you are interested in the on-demand webinars from Mauser, please do head to the description of this video where you will find a link to this page where you can find years worth of insights from Mauser and various other companies. Now, this is normally the part of the show where I would say that we don't have sponsors or YouTube advertisements, so you should go to the Electromaker online store if you want to support us, but I am thrilled to say that this week's show is sponsored by Nordic Semiconductor. Now, if you're not familiar with Nordic Semiconductor, they provide a variety of hardware for pretty much every wireless connectivity use case you could imagine. Their system on chips and system in packages range from Wi-Fi 6 devices through to Bluetooth Low Energy, Thread, cellular IoT, Zigbee. If you're using the Matter protocol, they all work with that as well. And they also provide a variety of developer tools, including an entire SDK, a VS Code extension for working with all of their hardware, and on their site, a wide variety of resources for learning how to use said SDK, which is based on Zephyr, but actually takes away a lot of the complexity, and you can get started with it without any actual knowledge of the Zephyr project. I would argue actually that their NRF fundamentals course is a better introduction to Zephyr than many of the actual Zephyr introductions, because it allows you to get used to a lot of the ways you will work with Zephyr when you really dive into the depths without needing to know them. And most Nordic development kits come with an example that allow you to actually do the thing it is for right out of the box, and then deconstruct that and make it do what you want. Now, just a couple of weeks ago when we were at Electronica in Munich, it was quite exciting because we didn't have any appointments with them, but we just so happened to walk up to the stand on the first day of the conference when they had just launched their new system on chip, the nRF54L15. So the nRF54L15 series takes over from the nRF52 series in that it is a Bluetooth Low Energy system on chip that really emphasizes the low energy side of things. However, amazingly, the nRF54 series uses even less energy than the previous generation of nRF52 chips, but actually has a lot more compute power. And if you would like to see that in action, we did have an interview and demo with Pavel from Nordic at Electronica. I will leave a link to that in the description. And they had a little thing here where you could literally run the same tests using the nRF52 kit and 54 kit and see in real time the profiling of how much power it used and the time it took to do certain tasks. For those of you that may not be familiar with the numbering of the series, the nRF54 series is taking over from both the nRF52 and nRF53 series. Previously, nRF52 stood for the low energy side of Bluetooth Low Energy, whereas the nRF5340, while still capable of very low power usage, had a little bit more compute to it and was for slightly bigger tasks. The nRF54L series has taken over from the nRF52, and the nRF54H series has taken over from the nRF53, and 5340 being the old flagship. Nordic also recently, well, I say recently, in the last couple of years, moved into Wi-Fi with their Wi-Fi 6 companion IC, the nRF7002. This adds Wi-Fi 6 and all the wonderful things that come from the newer Wi-Fi protocols to any project that you have. Of course, it will work perfectly with Nordic devices, but it can be a companion chip for any host MCU or system. And there are development kits available specifically for the 7002 that feature other Nordic Bluetooth Low Energy system on chips as the controller. In fact, there are development kits for all of these things that I'm talking about here, including the recently released nRF54L15. The development kit, as you can see, breaks out pretty much everything that you would want to break out from the chip, allowing you to evaluate and design using it. From a developer standpoint, Nordic has the Dev Zone and the Nordic Developer Academy. The Dev Zone being a constantly updated blog of the very cutting edge of what is happening with Nordic's hardware and how you can use it. And these articles aren't necessarily theoretical, they take you through real examples. The Getting Started with NR Plus and Phi example, takes you through the concept, sure, but it also gives you a working example you can fire up on your hardware to actually understand it from the inside out. But from the other end of the spectrum, if you are like me, maybe someone who is getting started with this kind of hardware, the Developer Academy is fantastic. I think I've previously mentioned that the NRF Connect SDK Fundamentals is a particularly good introduction to the way that you work with Nordic's gear and has very far-reaching use cases beyond just the Nordic hardware that you have in your hands. It's just generally a very good education source. The final thing I want to say, which isn't necessarily part of the sponsor message, but just something I thought was very cool and I want to share once again, is that one of the things we saw at Electronica is that Nordic are, I believe, the first company to make use of the thread-enabled radio in an iPhone to do straight-to-thread mesh networks without the need for an edge router. I'll not say much more than that for now. We'll be hearing more about it as time goes by, but I did think this was very cool, given that that's always been a bit of a stumbling block with certain elements of thread. If you wanted to start developing it yourself, you needed an edge router in order to test your thread-based products and designs and prototypes. Theoretically, that is something that could be a thing of the past. If you'd like to know more about that, there will be a link in the description below. But once again, thank you to Nordic Semiconductor for sponsoring this video. If you would like to find out more about anything I've said in this message, head to the links under this video, and the main Nordic website takes you through all of their products, resources, and everything else that you would want to know about them. Thank you, Nordic. It is time for funding website things, and this week we are looking at WebScreen. Now, WebScreen is a crowd supply project which is in pre-launch. There's no price for it just yet. This project is launching soon, as it says there. And it is a small AMOLED display that is designed to fit on top of your monitor in the same kind of way that a webcam would, hence the name WebScreen. This is an ESP32S3 board with a micro SD slot on it, with a USB-C power port, but you can also use the USB-C port for configuring things via WebSockets. And it's designed to be something that can give you notifications or whatever you want it to do. Now, the hardware side of it is fantastic, but in a way quite simple. It's a very nice development board with a screen on it, but the team behind it have really put the time into making it as configurable as possible and as usable as possible to as wide a range of people as possible. I feel like I said possible far too many times in that sentence. So from a consumer perspective, this is already quite a fun idea, because the web screen can sit on top of your monitor, and there will be a desktop app as well for Mac, Windows, or Linux that will allow you to choose from various apps that have been created by the Hardware Media Lab, but also by the community. The idea is that there will be this open store where you can put the things that you have created up onto it. And just a quick point, the screen itself is USB-C connected, but you don't have to connect it to a computer via a cable. All the configuration is done via your local network, and the ESP32 on board will connect to that network. So you could theoretically set this up anywhere and do all the configuration on your computer, and then have a completely separate notification thing sitting on the kitchen shelf if you wanted it to be that way. Now, I think most viewers of this show will share my thoughts about this, which is it does look very awesome, and I think the idea that they've got is really solid. They're going to have their own software, there's going to be their own marketplace for putting various things on it, and I really do hope this gets picked up so that lots of people put a lot of interesting apps on the marketplace. But pretty much my first thought was, how do I hack this thing to just do whatever I want? It could be something completely esoteric that no one else would ever have any use for. I wouldn't be putting it on the marketplace. How do you program this? Well, it's really quite interesting. They've chosen to use Elk, and if you're not familiar, Elk is a JavaScript engine designed for working with microcontrollers. I actually looked into it a couple of years ago because I was going to pitch writing a few articles about it. Elk is a separate project, and they're building it on top of Elk. But just before we get to the way that WebScreen are using it, essentially it allows you to embed JavaScript code into microcontroller code. It's really beautifully put together, actually. I know that JavaScript has a bad reputation, and of course it's not going to run as fast as native code, but they've basically implemented ES6, I think, at this point. Was it ES5 or is it now ES6? A usable subset of ES6 in just a single C file and a header file, and it's completely has no dependencies to compile as well. But the thing itself allows you to write JavaScript code on a microcontroller. And I saw this and I thought, that is quite cool, but the way that you do it here was a little cumbersome to me. You're writing JavaScript code, but it's still embedded within the C program that you then upload as firmware to the microcontroller. WebScreen have completely got around this. The WebScreen team have got around having to embed JavaScript code into your firmware that you would upload anyway by having any JavaScript code found on the microSD card evaluated automatically by the onboard firmware. So this really lowers the barrier of entry for people who want to get started tweaking things. I know that JavaScript has a bit of a bad reputation, but the way Elk is implemented is actually really quite nice. And of course, if you want to do this the more traditional way, you absolutely can. There are instructions here for how to get started using the Arduino IDE, and all of the dependencies dependencies and things that you need in order to program it via USB as normal as well. So as far as things go, I feel like this is a really nice idea, and they're coming at it from various different angles. It is, of course, a pre-launch product, and we will come back to it when there is a price. But if you've ever, looked at the top of your screen, saw the webcam there, and wondered if there's something a little bit more useful that it could be used for, maybe WebScreen is something that you might be interested in taking a look at. That has been our show for this week. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for your continued support. As always, if you would like to support the show, you can head to electromaker.io/shop to look for the things for your next hobby project, or maybe the things you need for your job. It is getting close to Christmas as well, and now might be the perfect time to buy that Raspberry Pi starter kit for the little hacker in your life. I'd like to once again thank Nordic Semiconductor for sponsoring this show, and I look forward to speaking to you all next week. I hope you have a safe, fun, and creative week. Until then.